In a significant development amid the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin engaged in a 2-hour phone call on May 19, 2025 aimed at addressing the war's escalation and exploring the potential for peace negotiations. Despite the lengthy discussion, both leaders appeared to leave the conversation without clear breakthroughs as tensions continue to mount on the ground. President Trump notably softened his earlier demand for an immediate ceasefire, pivoting instead to support Putin's proposal for negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. This shift underscores the complex dynamics at play as Ukraine remains adamant about securing an unconditional ceasefire before any serious discussions can begin. Following the call, Trump expressed cautious optimism, stating he anticipated progress in upcoming negotiations, but warned he would withdraw from the process if no tangible results were achieved. In the backdrop of these diplomatic efforts, violence has surged, with Russian forces intensifying attacks across Ukraine. A recent drone strike in the Donetsk region resulted in the tragic deaths of at least 9 civilians, highlighting the urgency of finding a peaceful resolution. As the conflict drags on, the human toll continues to escalate, with Ukraine reporting over 1,000 Russian casualties in just a single day of fighting. During the call, Putin characterized the dialogue as meaningful, but he reiterated that Russia's demands must be met for any cessation of hostilities. He emphasized the necessity of addressing what he termed the root causes of the conflict, which includes Russia's insistence on maintaining significant influence over Ukraine and its territories. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, on the other hand, accused Russia of playing for time to consolidate its military position while avoiding substantive commitments to peace. The geopolitical ramifications of the call extend beyond Ukraine's borders. European Union officials have responded to the stalled negotiations with a new package of sanctions aimed at crippling Russia's military capabilities and economic resources. This latest round targets various sectors, including military and energy, as well as Russia's shadow fleet of oil tankers. Zelensky welcomed these measures, asserting that increased pressure on Russia is crucial for fostering a genuine path to peace. Despite the ongoing discussions, the complexities of the negotiations remain daunting. Russia has maintained its hardline stance, demanding that Ukraine relinquish control over territories it claims, including parts of Donetsk and Luhansk, before any ceasefire can be negotiated. This approach raises questions about Russia's commitment to a peaceful resolution, as it appears to leverage military gains to extract further concessions. As the situation evolves, it is clear that any lasting peace will require both sides to engage in good faith negotiations. The international community, particularly the West, is watching closely as the stakes of this conflict extend far beyond regional borders. The potential for a ceasefire and subsequent peace agreement hangs in the balance, dependent on the willingness of both parties to compromise and the strategic decisions made in the coming weeks. Looking ahead, the continued involvement of international mediators, including the possibility of negotiations hosted by the Vatican, could play a pivotal role in shaping the future of Ukraine. However, as long as military operations persist and demands remain entrenched, the prospect of a swift resolution remains elusive. The coming days will be critical in determining whether diplomacy can prevail over conflict in a war that has reshaped the geopolitical landscape of Europe. As the Russo-Ukrainian war enters its 1180th day, significant political developments and military actions continue to shape the landscape of the conflict. Recent elections in Romania have seen Dan's victory, which is expected to bolster support for Ukraine in the ongoing struggle against Russian aggression. This shift in Romanian leadership comes at a critical time as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has emphasized the need for sustained international aid to combat the ongoing military threat posed by Russia. On May 20, 2025, the United Kingdom and the European Union announced a new wave of sanctions targeting Russia, marking a concerted effort to increase pressure on Moscow amid ongoing hostilities. Foreign Secretary David Lammy described the new sanctions as a response to Russia's continued military actions across Ukraine and labeled President Vladimir Putin a warmonger. This latest round comprises 100 sanctions aimed at various sectors including military and energy, while also addressing Russian misinformation campaigns. The sanctions come as Zelensky has accused Russia of playing for time in negotiations, urging allied nations to intensify their pressure on Moscow. He stated, "It is obvious that Russia is trying to buy time to continue the war and occupation," highlighting the importance of realistic proposals for peace. The Ukrainian leader's remarks resonate as calls for an unconditional ceasefire grow louder, with officials from NATO and EU member states echoing the need for immediate action to halt hostilities. In a parallel development, the International Monetary Fund (IMF) has initiated a review of its $15.5 billion program for Ukraine, which is critical for maintaining economic stability amidst the war's devastation. The program is aimed at ensuring Ukraine's adherence to sound economic policies while combating corruption, essential for securing continued support from international allies. Military engagements also escalated recently, with Ukraine's air defense forces successfully intercepting 93 out of 108 Russian drones during a nighttime attack. This incident illustrates the ongoing volatility on the battlefield as drone warfare remains a critical component of the conflict. The Ukrainian military reported that their defenses repelled the assault, showcasing their resilience despite the dire circumstances. Amid these developments, former U.S. President Donald Trump has entered the fray with calls for negotiations, suggesting that discussions could take place at the Vatican, a proposal welcomed by both Kyiv and Moscow. However, his administration's approach has faced scrutiny, as critics express concern over potential compromises that could undermine Ukraine's territorial integrity. As the international community watches closely, the implications of these political maneuvers and military actions are profound. The outcome of Dan's election in Romania may well influence the dynamics of support for Ukraine, while the tightening of sanctions against Russia reflects a growing consensus among Western allies on the need for a unified stance. The coming days will be crucial as Ukrainian officials seek to leverage international support to bring about a peaceful resolution while fending off ongoing military threats. The path to peace remains fraught with challenges, but the commitment of Ukraine's allies appears resolute in the face of adversity. In a high-stakes diplomatic effort, President Donald Trump engaged in a lengthy conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Monday, seeking to broker a ceasefire in the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The call lasted over 2 hours, but it did not yield the immediate peace deal that Ukraine and its allies have long sought. Instead, both leaders emerged from the discussion with a commitment to initiate talks for a future peace agreement, a move that is seen as a tentative step forward amid ongoing hostilities. Following the call, President Trump expressed optimism on social media, describing the tone of the conversation as excellent. He noted that Russia is eager to engage in large-scale trade with the United States once the war concludes, emphasizing the potential for economic collaboration in the future. However, he also cautioned that given the complexities of the situation, he might withdraw from the negotiations if progress remains elusive. "I'll tell you, big egos involved. But I think something's going to happen. And if it doesn't, I just back away," Trump stated, hinting at the precarious nature of diplomatic discussions. Putin, for his part, characterized the dialogue as constructive, indicating Russia's willingness to work with Ukraine on a memorandum defining the principles and timeline for a potential peace accord. He reiterated the Kremlin's desire for a peaceful resolution to the crisis, but emphasized that the path to peace must be determined through direct negotiations between the conflicting parties. The possibility of the Vatican hosting these talks adds an intriguing layer, with both leaders acknowledging the symbolic significance of such a venue. This diplomatic engagement comes on the heels of direct talks between Russian and Ukrainian delegations in Istanbul, where both sides agreed to exchange 1,000 prisoners of war but failed to reach an agreement on a ceasefire. Following those talks, Russia intensified its military operations, launching a series of drone strikes that resulted in civilian casualties, further complicating the prospects for peace. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been vocal about the need for stronger sanctions against Russia if it continues its aggressive actions, stating that sustained pressure on Moscow is essential for achieving a genuine peace. As Trump navigated these discussions, he faced scrutiny from various quarters regarding his approach to the conflict. Critics have accused him of offering concessions to Russia while demanding sacrifices from Ukraine, a stance that former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine Bridget Brink condemned as appeasement. Brink's comments reflect a broader sentiment among some U.S. officials who argue that a strong stance against Russian aggression is necessary to uphold international norms and support Ukraine's sovereignty. European leaders have also expressed skepticism about Russia's commitment to peace. French President Emmanuel Macron urged Putin to take the proposed 30-day unconditional ceasefire seriously, warning that failure to do so could lead to intensified sanctions. This sentiment was echoed by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who reiterated the EU's support for Ukraine and the need for a robust response to Russian provocations. As diplomatic efforts unfold, the situation on the ground remains dire. Reports of civilian casualties continue to emerge, and Russia's military campaign shows no signs of abating. Analysts suggest that the Kremlin's current military advantage may embolden it to negotiate from a position of strength, potentially leaving Ukraine in a less favorable position as the conflict drags on. In conclusion, while the recent discussions between Trump and Putin may represent a glimmer of hope for future peace talks, the path forward is fraught with challenges. The international community remains watchful and the potential for renewed escalations looms large. As the war continues to ravage Ukraine, the need for a comprehensive and lasting resolution becomes ever more pressing. The coming weeks will be crucial in determining whether these diplomatic overtures can translate into meaningful progress or if the cycle of violence will persist. In a significant diplomatic overture, Vice President J.D. Vance met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Rome on Sunday, May 18, 2025. This meeting comes in the wake of escalating tensions in the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, with discussions aimed at fortifying alliances and seeking pathways to peace. Vance's visit occurred alongside his attendance at the inaugural Mass of Pope Leo XIV, which added a layer of international significance to the proceedings. The dialogue between Vance and Zelensky is part of broader U.S. efforts to support Ukraine amid its struggle against Russian aggression. During their discussions, the two leaders focused on critical issues including trade, NATO spending, and the ongoing war. Vance emphasized the U.S. commitment to its European allies, stating the individual countries within Europe are important allies of the United States. But of course we have some disagreements, as friends sometimes do, on issues like trade. We also have many agreements and many things we can work on together. Following his meeting with Zelensky, Vance engaged in discussions with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, where they further explored trade relations and military support for Ukraine. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who accompanied Vance, underscored the importance of unity among Western nations in the face of Russian military actions. As these diplomatic efforts unfolded, President Donald Trump simultaneously engaged in a lengthy phone conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin, reportedly lasting over 2 hours. Despite the extensive discussions, no immediate ceasefire agreement was reached. However, both leaders expressed a willingness to pursue future peace talks, with Trump indicating that the Vatican might facilitate these negotiations. Trump's optimistic tone was evident in his social media remarks, where he noted the tone and spirit of the conversation were excellent, adding that Russia is interested in post-war trade with the U.S. Zelensky, for his part, remained cautious about the diplomatic overtures. He accused Russia of attempting to buy time to prolong its military operations, stating, "It is obvious that Russia is trying to buy time in order to continue its war and occupation." He stressed the necessity for stronger sanctions against Russia and clear proposals for ending the conflict at the negotiating table. The backdrop of these high-level discussions includes the recent prisoner exchange agreement reached during talks in Turkey. Although this marked a significant step, the failure to achieve a ceasefire highlighted the ongoing complexities of the situation. Ukrainian officials have expressed concerns that Russia's military strategy may be geared towards maintaining pressure while negotiating from a position of strength. Analysts suggest that Russia's current military advances could diminish Ukraine's leverage in future negotiations. As the international community closely watches these developments, the next steps remain uncertain. The engagement of the Vatican as a potential host for peace talks adds a unique diplomatic angle to the negotiations, perhaps signaling a desire for a more collaborative approach to resolving the conflict. In the coming days, the outcomes of these discussions and the reactions from both Moscow and Kiev will be pivotal in shaping the trajectory of the war in Ukraine and the broader geopolitical landscape. The world waits to see whether the recent talks can translate into meaningful action towards peace or if the cycle of conflict will continue unabated.